Hello, and welcome to Raising the Bar with the MBBA. I'm Adeola Adejobi.
And I'm Jason Clark, President of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. The MBBA is the largest association of predominantly African-American attorneys in New York. The goal of Raising the Bar with the MBBA is to identify justice issues affecting our communities while also trying to identify solutions in the process.
Today, we are going to discuss inequities in the college admissions process. Joining us are New York State Regent Mead and MBBA board member and attorney Carl Forbes. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
So we've definitely heard a little bit in the news about what's been going on when it comes to some of these issues, when it comes to the college admissions process and some of the inequities or some of the advantages that some folks seem to have and ways that people have been able to kind of skate the system. Carl, can you help, at least for some of our viewers who may not be familiar with what recently happened, and giving a little bit of a background before we start our conversation?
Sure. So I think that when thinking about college, we all try to leverage our privilege or whatever beneficial attributes we have to enhance our case. The reality of what took place here is that a massive fraudulent scheme or a scandal took place where cheating and bribery were used to for rich as well as celebrities for their children to ultimately be admitted to prestigious colleges. And so this scam was recently uncovered and reported on through the news. Federal prosecutors talked about what they uncovered. The man who perpetrated or led the entire, basically the mastermind of the scam, was a man named William Rick Singer, and he's the CEO of a college admissions prep company. And there were two fundamental ways that he ran the scam. One was cheating on college admissions exams, the SAT or the ACT, in two ways. One, by having a third party actually sit and take the exam for a high school student. And you may think, how could somebody as a third party walk in and take an exam for someone who they are not? And the reality is part of the scam was to bribe proctors or test administrators to allow this third party to actually be in the room and take the exam. The second way they did it regarding the exams were to actually replace the students' responses. So in this instance, in the first instance, the students might not have been aware of what their parents were engaging in to try to get them into college. The second instance, or they may have been aware, I'm sorry, in the first instance. In the second instance, the students were actually sitting for the exams themselves, and then their responses were being replaced with answers from the third party through this elaborate scheme involving the proctors, administrators. The second way the scam has been taking place is bribing college coaches to accept students for particular sports where the student didn't actually play a sport or that specific sport where they were being presented to the college coach for. And the coaches have a lot of weight in terms of getting students admitted to the school. And so Mr. Singer was recently, he pleaded guilty to multiple charges and admitted that what the prosecutors have accused him of are true. And so far what we know in the recent weeks is that approximately 50 people have been identified, including celebrities, and there may be many more that the prosecutors have yet to reveal, and so more lawsuits, federal prosecutions could be coming down the line. One other thing about what Mr. Singer did, he also set up a foundation, and that's how the payments were being funneled from the wealthy families to this foundation, which actually allowed the families to receive tax deductions for these allegedly charitable contributions, and then the money was being used as bribes to the various additional third-party participants in the scheme.
And it's just amazing hearing about some of those details. And I mean, the first question I have, and again, we'll have a larger conversation, but when it comes to that particular story that broke, I mean, what are some of the ramifications for those who essentially perpetuated this scam on the schools? and frankly, all of us?
So one are criminal charges, right?
Right.
Mr. Singer's already pleaded guilty. Federal prosecutors have also charged a few test administrators with conspiracy to commit racketeering. So they're basically treating this like a criminal organization in the way you would think about the mob or some other entity where a large number of people have come together to conspire to do something criminal. And so the criminal charges may continue, as I mentioned before, to flow against the parents, the third parties who were involved in taking the exams or submitting responses or changing the responses.
Right.
There is some possibility that students could face repercussions from a criminal perspective if they had knowledge of what was taking place ultimately on their behalf, because they're the ones who ultimately were admitted to these universities. And so there are more that we can definitely talk about as we
Right.
progress.
Okay.
And several of those students are currently on college campuses through this scam, and so some of them have been barred from registering for classes pending further review by their universities.
Yeah, and this whole thing, I mean, just to kind of take a step back, I think what we'd really like to spend some time talking about are, again, some of these inequities that some folks have and then some folks haven't. And especially, I think one of the reasons this case has certainly, or this instance has gotten so much news is about the idea of those who may have the resources to be able to influence the system and the role that wealth plays in education for certain folks. So, Nan, can you tell us just a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing or about when it comes to the role that wealth plays when it comes to people's education?
Sure. I think what's so shocking about this particular case is the amount of affluence that all of these defendants already possessed. I mean, arguably, they wanted for nothing in terms of being able to pursue these admissions processes on behalf of their children. Some of the defendants include a partner at a law firm, a partner at a private equity firm, several well-known celebrities, as we've discussed, and it really juxtaposes against what so many other students are trying to do who don't have the means. And it really goes back to resources that are available at high school, at the high school level. These affluent families typically have access to sports such as, I think one of the coaches involved was a water polo coach. That is a sport for the affluent. Also lacrosse and even soccer in many places. In urban areas, soccer is a sport that is very difficult to come by, particularly for students who are attending public school. One of the interesting things recently is that Chancellor Carranza, the New York City Chancellor, recently committed to spending more resources on high school sports. And in addition to, obviously, the mental and physical benefits that can confer upon students in high school, also it helps with college admissions. And students in New York City who potentially are low income are really missing out on those opportunities, especially when it comes to sports recruiting.
If I may add, one of the things that really stood out from what Nan said is the fact that they have the opportunity, for instance, to spend money and hire private coaches and tutors to work with their students that the less fortunate or not as affluent don't have those opportunities to do. So to cheat your way into spots at universities that could be available to hardworking and well-deserving students who don't have the same privilege off the bat based on your parents' wealth and status in society, just troubling and really underscores the inequities that we're looking at from a scam like this. And I think that's part of why one of the ramifications that's happening right now, there's a class action lawsuit that's been brought by students and parents of students who have not been accepted to some of these schools and saying they wouldn't have spent their money and wasted their time applying if they knew the system was rigged to ultimately end up allowing wealthy, affluent, high status individuals to cheat and bribe their way into those seats.
Right, and I would also say, now that this has been exposed, what are some of the implications moving forward as well?
I think it raises a really important question about who sits on admissions committees, quite frankly, and who has been part of this system through their own personal experience. I think particularly in the Harvard case, I mean, I would love to know who's sitting on Harvard's admissions committee and on the committees of all of the all of the elite institutions. I think when there's a lack of diversity in the room, certainly that lends itself to implicit biases, and that can flow through to the admissions process. I think that given that we have demographic shifts in our country, right? We already have, I think, 5 states with a population that is majority non-white population. Several other states, including New York State, are trending in that direction. And in an ideal world, I mean, we would educate a student body that is reflective of the population. And why is that important? Well, it's important because we need to ensure that we have a trained workforce that can participate in all aspects of society. So this really goes beyond the baseline of college admissions and who is getting in. It's really more about who are we educating and who can become productive members of society.
One of the things that Carl, you had mentioned is the fact that, at least in this most recent case that came to light, there were tax benefits that people were getting. There was a foundation that was created. So some folks may, for example, say that it's just a couple of people, and maybe there's a benefit where if someone could put a lot of money into a school, maybe that helps everybody. But again, there's the tax part that maybe someone could speak about, and then 2, maybe we can discuss a little bit about something larger when it comes to someone who's bringing a lot of money, but whether or not is that enough to really be able to justify some of these manipulations of the system that other folks won't have the opportunity to be able to take advantage of.
So in my reading on the manipulations of the system, I think one of the things I saw Mr. Singer actually discussed was there's a front door, a side door, and a back door. The front door is the legitimate way in, the students who actually take the SAT, they do everything they need to do to get properly admitted to school. And then you have the back door, which Jace, I think is what you're getting to, is the parent or the wealthy individual who donates money to the university, gets their name on a building in hopes that their child will ultimately be admitted, or to kind of help their child's case. Not illegal, questionable morally, ethically. We've got questions there, but that's no guarantee. What Mr. Singer admits to doing is a side door of literally guaranteeing admission to students based on cheating, bribery, and fraud. And so the implications are that maybe we do need to think more about what we have allowed and been okay with in terms of that back door into universities and saying, maybe we have to stop that, despite the benefit that building the new library for all students brings. Because if ultimately everyone says, well, all I have to do is donate $2 million or donate $10 million or build a library, and my family for generations can go to this university, at some point you're going to have universities that become family institutions. And how does that ultimately benefit all of society?
Lawmakers are also starting to take a look at this in terms of the deductibility of these donations. So there's actually going to be a bill introduced in the Senate by Ron Wyden, who is a Democrat from Oregon. And in the bill, he proposes that donations by parents to colleges and universities will not be able to take the deduction if their child is going to go to that particular school. So we'll see how that discussion evolves in the Senate. Yes, yes.
Yeah, especially if someone's an alumni of the school and maybe they want their kid to go there too. So it'd be interesting to see what that may look like.
Yes.
Another issue that started to come up when we're talking about this is disabilities, right? When people are actually taking the exam, and certainly there are folks who may have legitimate reasons why they need additional time because of, again, all types of disabilities folks may have. And can you talk a little bit about how that is used by some folks to be able to give some folks who don't have those actual disabilities a leg up on others?
Sure. So students who have learning differences, typically they're diagnosed during their elementary and secondary years, right? And so they will carry that with them into the college admissions process, and it's typically well documented. Part of the scam was that in some cases the proctors, because when students with learning differences sit for the SAT, often they're allowed extra time. Sometimes they're in a completely separate room with just the proctor. Depending on the nature of their learning difference, the proctor might read the exam questions to them. And what was found in this case is that or what's being alleged is that the proctors were sometimes guiding students to the right answers in this isolated environment. In other cases, the student would take the exam, leave, and then the proctor had been essentially bribed to review the test and change the answers if necessary after the student had left. And then, of course, as we know, there were other students who were, in fact, hired to take the test on behalf of some of these others. So, I mean, and I've seen quite a bit of correspondence from actual college students with learning differences, and they're expressing outrage at the fact that, you know, this scam has sort of made a mockery of their learning differences and their own struggles in the college applications process.
Yeah.
And a scam like this, ultimately, it raises questions about the legitimacy of someone who actually has a disability or a learning challenge. Likewise, it raises questions about the legitimacy of someone who was properly admitted to a university, worked hard, earned their degree, and their family might actually have money, but their family did nothing wrong, and now they may be lumped in the court of public opinion into the same group with these people who are actually involved in the conspiracy and who are actually frauding the system to get their children into these universities. And that's concerning, that people will be lumped together, unfortunately, as a result of the bad actions of these individuals.
Yeah, and I actually want to just make sure that we, for the viewers, drill down on what exactly was illegal, right? Because some people would say, well, you donate money, why shouldn't your child be able to go, right? Obviously, I think that regarding the SATs, I think that one is clear, but I think there's a little bit more of a gray area with that.
So I'll give you one example. Apparently, students who never played a sport like lacrosse or crew, they were literally photoshopping their pictures onto the bodies of students engaging in those sports and submitting it as part of their package. And what made it illegal is the coach had already been paid off to accept it and then shepherd it through the admissions department to get those students admitted. So it's beyond donations. They weren't making donations to the university or engaging, as far as we know, university personnel to understand how they might enhance their students' application. They were using this individual, Rick Singer, and his company to bribe people, literally, in order to guarantee their students' acceptance, regardless of what their grades looked like, regardless of their extracurricular activities. And they were crossing the line in terms of the question between donating and enhancing rather than cheating.
Right.
And I think it's important to, again, juxtapose that against students who come from low-income backgrounds, who really struggle not only to complete their studies in hard situations, but also to go through the college applications process. I was a first-generation college student, and I did not have, first of all, funds to access an admissions consultant as these folks did, nor did I have a parent who could help guide me through the applications process itself. Although I went to a well-respected high school, at the time the staffing on the counseling side was, I think, once a quarter I could meet with her for 15 minutes because she had a caseload of 300 students. And so it was a very quick conversation. It was, are you going to apply to the state college? No. Well, why not? I gave her my reason, and then went through my list of other options with her. I didn't have somebody advising me for hours on end as to the quality of my essay, the content, Certainly, my extracurriculars were my own in terms of what I was able to do, and I was able to access them, thank goodness, through my New York City public school education. And not all students even have access to that. So again, there's an irony in the fabrication of extracurricular activities among folks with means who very could have easily pursued those with at their schools.
Yeah, and I think, let's definitely try to dive into that a little bit more. I mean, some of what Adeola is saying, some of what Nan is saying, is that, yes, I mean, we're not talking about, certainly there are instances where people have clearly broken the law, but a lot of it is gray areas. I mean, if you're going to a school that's an underperforming school, where they have a lot of folks who are there and they're telling you, these are the schools, they're trying to funnel you maybe into particular schools because those are the schools that maybe just the large majority of people at that school have already gone to, as opposed to actually giving you that individual guidance that you may be able to get at another school. So maybe if the two of you could talk a little bit about, again, some of those things that are unique to different schools, whether it's the guidance portion of it, or whether it's the ability to be able to pay for testing or test preparation to get there. What are some of these things that are a reason why we have such a dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots when it comes to education?
Sure. I mean, well, access to test prep is a perfect example. It can cost thousands of dollars, and even if you take a course that's off the shelf, that's still out of reach for many families financially. However, we know that more affluent families can afford a private tutor, which it's a dream to average students who simply don't have the means to help navigate them through the process. The other thing is recommendations. Who can you go to put in a word? Can you get, I think some of these, more affluent families can obviously access their parents' network, right, for things like internships, whereas less affluent students can't do that. So, I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, even if you talk about computer literacy and who has access to technology at home, the college applications process is now an online process. It's an exclusively online process. In my day, it was, fill in the bubbles on the FAFSA form, no more. And for students who, and it's important to remember the context, especially in New York City, the homeless rate of students is very high right now. It's hovering at around 10%. We have
I'm sorry, 10% of students are homeless?
Live in temporary housing, yes. And I want to say the number is about 30,000 sleep in shelters every night.
Coupled with the working poor.
Coupled with the working poor.
Yeah.
So you have a situation where we have the largest school district in the United States with a large homeless population, a large percentage of students whose first language is other than English. And all of those impact the college applications process. And so what does it say about society when roadblocks are thrown up so that they can't navigate that process, right? Because college is supposed to be the path to a better life, and whatever your parents were not able to provide, your education will get you, sort of out of your socioeconomic status and into a better life. Think about a student who has to actually go to the guidance counselor's hours and wait to use a computer. Yeah. To write their essay. I mean, that's a very simple thing that that a lot of students are challenged with.
Yeah. And so in the last 5 minutes, we would also like to talk about, race and class here, basically. When we talk about affirmative action, that was something that people were like, wait a minute. People have said that affirmative action was the reason why people are not getting into schools because someone took their spot or something like that. But now we find out that there's a whole scandal, which obviously I'm sure this is going to lead to a lot more investigations and litigation from other scandals that may be exposed as well. So can you talk a little bit more about comparing the two and how those two things compare?
And legacies as well, how that's part of the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
In just a few minutes that we have left.
Yeah.
All right, so the irony is that the Ivy League schools and the top tier schools continue to weigh heavily legacy as a factor in admissions, far outweighing affirmative action. I know that there's a chart somewhere where I forget who ran the study, but there's a study that imputes a certain number of SAT points depending on what subcategory you're in. So if you're black, then you get a 200-point advantage. If you're Latino, you get 150. But the reality is that Black and Latino enrollment at Ivy League and at elite colleges has actually gone down in the last 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's actually gone down. And so when we talk about, again, about demographic shifts and, you know, the fact that there are, you know, more people of color and more people of color of college age who want to pursue higher education, those numbers are not being reflected in enrollment, right?
One of the interesting things to me about bringing affirmative action into the conversation and people saying, well, seats have been taken because of affirmative action, they ignore the reality that affirmative action was put in place to right a wrong, to correct the discrimination that had been done against minorities in admissions processes for hundreds of years. And so I think it's shameful almost to compare it in this discussion about people who are cheating, who have access and privilege and can use that privilege in order to enhance their children's candidacies. And so I'm reminded of a similar situation growing up to Nan. I'd call myself, having grown up, lower middle class, but I grew up in a single parent household. My mother always said to me, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And it's scary to think that students today might have to work twice as hard or 4 times as hard to get a quarter as much because they're facing people who are cheating their way in. And the final point I'll add is that I think what's also concerning, a lot of these students aren't going to school because they really care about the education they're going to get. It's about the access. The point Nan made about, well, they have access to their parents' network. For them, it's if I go to a prestigious university, I can then say I went to a prestigious university and people will respect me as a result, as opposed to those who want to make a better life for themselves, who want an education because it matters to them and their development as a person and ultimately as a family unit and bettering society.
Yes, yes. Well, that's our time.
Wow.
Obviously, there's so much more that we could cover,
Yes.
but I want to thank our guests, Nan and Carl, for being here with us today.
And thank you for watching Raising the Bar with the MBBA on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network.